The first snowfall of December should have been magical. Instead, I stood at my grandmother's kitchen window, watching Emma teach Tyler how to make perfect snow angels on our hill, the same spot where she and I had created countless memories. Since we were 7 years old, 22 years of tradition, and she was handing it over to someone else like it meant nothing. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Growing up in Milbrook, Vermont meant that winter wasn't just a season, it was a way of life. The town nestled between rolling hills that turned into perfect sledding slopes come December, and Riverside Park became our playground the moment the first flakes fell. Emma, Richardson, and I discovered our special spot when we were just kids. A gentle slope that overlooked the frozen Winooski River, perfect for making snow angels without anyone bothering us. Emma lived in the massive colonial house on Maple Street, the one with the circular driveway and gates that reminded everyone she was a Richardson and Richardson Resort Empire, owners of 3 ski lodges across New England. My grandmother's Victorian cottage sat on the other side of town, inherited along with me when my parents died in a car accident during my freshman year of high school. The Richardsons took pity on the orphaned kid next door. Emma's mother, Patricia, often said I was like the son she never had. That should have been my first warning sign. Every year since we were 7, Emma and I had the same tradition. The moment the weather forecast predicted the first real snowfall, not the light dustings that barely covered the grass, but the thick, fluffy kind that stuck to everything, we'd bundle up and race to our hill. We'd lie down side by side, spread our arms and legs wide, and create perfect angel impressions in the pristine snow. Then we'd carefully stand up, admire our handiwork. And Emma would always say the same thing. Another year, another pair of angels watching over us. It was our thing, sacred almost. Emma and I were inseparable through elementary school, thick as thieves through middle school, and by high school, everyone assumed we'd end up together. We never officially dated. Emma always said she didn't want to ruin our friendship. We held hands during scary movies. She wore my Letterman jacket to football games, and I was her automatic +1 to every family event. Her parents adored me, treating me like family during holidays and summer barbecues at their lake house. I thought we were building toward something permanent. His senior year, when college applications were due, Emma and I made plans to attend the University of Vermont together. She'd study business to eventually take over the family empire, and I'd pursue art education, maybe teach at the local high school someday. We toured apartments in Burlington, picked out furniture we'd never buy, and talked about getting a dog together. I was so certain of our future that I didn't even apply anywhere else. Then, February of senior year happened. Emma had been acting strange for weeks, distant, constantly checking her phone, making excuses to avoid our usual hangout spots.
Ouch.
When I asked what was wrong, she'd flash that practice smile she used with her parents' business associates and insist everything was fine. But I knew Emma better than anyone, and everything was definitely not fine. The night before our graduation ceremony, I decided to surprise her. I'd been working on a photo series all semester, black and white shots of our favorite places around Milbrook, including dozens of pictures of our Snow Angel Hill in different seasons. I had them professionally printed and bound into a leather portfolio, with a note explaining how each location held a memory of us. It was supposed to be my graduation gift to her, a promise that no matter where life took us, we'd always have these places. I drove to the Richardson house around 8 in the evening, planning to give her the portfolio and maybe finally tell her I loved her.
Oh.
The words had been sitting in my throat for months, and graduation felt like the perfect time to be brave. The front door was unlocked, which wasn't unusual. The Richardsons had that small-town confidence that came with being the most prominent family around. I called out, but got no response, so I headed toward Emma's room upstairs. Her door was slightly open, and I could hear voices inside. "Mom's going to be so relieved," Emma was saying to someone on the phone. "She's been worried sick about the optics of me going to college with Jake. I mean, he's sweet and everything, but can you imagine me introducing some small-town art teacher as my boyfriend at business events? The family has a reputation to maintain." I froze halfway up the stairs, the portfolio suddenly feeling like dead weight in my hands. Tyler gets it, you know, she continued. His family owns that chain of boutique hotels in Aspen. We understand each other's world. Jake's he's been like a security blanket since my parents died. But I can't keep him around forever just because I feel sorry for him. I heard her laugh at something the person on the other end said, and the sound cut through me like ice water.
God.
You should see all the places he thinks are ours. There's this hill where we used to make snow angels as kids, and he still gets all sentimental about it every winter. It's honestly kind of pathetic. Tyler and I were there last week, and Jake would probably have a breakdown if he knew. My hand gripped the railing so hard my knuckles went white. Tyler Morrison, the guy who'd transferred to our school junior year from some prep academy in Connecticut, he was everything I wasn't: polished, connected, comfortable with casual cruelty, disguised as charm. Emma had introduced us at a party once, and Tyler had looked right through me like I was invisible. I know I should have ended things with Jake months ago, Emma continued, but he's so sensitive, and I didn't want to hurt him right before graduation. So he's better clean break. New chapter. Tyler's taking me to his family's place in the Hamptons this summer, and then we'll both be at Dartmouth in the fall. Dartmouth, not UVM like we'd planned. Oh, she'd been lying to me for months. I backed down the stairs as quietly as possible, my heart hammering so loud I was sure the whole house could hear it. The portfolio slipped from my numb fingers and scattered across the hardwood. Flort Wenny for carefully curated photographs of what I'd thought was our love story, now looking like evidence of my own delusion. I left them there and walked out. The drive home was a blur. I sat in my grandmother's driveway for an hour, staring at the house that suddenly felt more isolated than ever. Everything Emma had said replayed in my mind on an endless loop. Security blanket. Feel sorry for him, pathetic. How long had she seen me that way? How many times had she smiled to my face while planning her escape behind my back? The worst part wasn't even the betrayal, it was the realization that everyone probably knew except me. Tyler's smug expression whenever he saw us together suddenly made sense. The way some of Emma's other friends had been treating me lately like I was a child, they had to be patient with. The pitying looks from parents at graduation parties. I was the only one who didn't understand I was living in a fantasy. That night I did something I'd never done before. I called the University of Vermont admissions office and withdrew my acceptance. Then I spent 4 hours researching art schools on the West Coast, as far from Vermont as I could get without leaving the country. Pacific Northwest College of Arts in Portland, Oregon had a photography program that still accepted late applications. The portfolio requirements were extensive, but I had enough work saved up from high school. By sunrise, I'd submitted my application, paid the rush processing fee with money from my graduation party, and started planning the biggest life change I'd ever made. I didn't tell anyone, not even Zoe, my closest friend besides Emma. I couldn't bear the thought of explaining what I'd overheard. Couldn't stomach the idea of people looking at me with the same pity Emma had described. Instead, I spent the summer working double shifts at the local photography studio, saving every penny for my move west. Emma tried calling a few times after graduation, probably wondering why I'd suddenly become unavailable. I let every call go to voicemail, and eventually they stopped coming. Through Zoe, I heard that Emma and Tyler had made their relationship official at some 4th of July party, and that the whole town was talking about what a perfect match they were. Perfect. Just like she'd always wanted. In August, I loaded everything I owned into my grandmother's old Subaru and drove 3,000 miles to start over. Portland was everything Milbrook wasn't: trainy instead of snowy, anonymous instead of suffocating, full of people who cared more about your art than your family name. For the first time in my life, I could be Jake the photographer, not Jake the orphan, not Jake the charity case, not Jake who was holding Emma Richardson back from her real life. I thought I'd never look back. But Oregon winters are different from Vermont winters, gray and wet instead of bright and cold, with rain that soaks through everything instead of snow that transforms the world into something magical. And despite everything, despite the betrayal, and the humiliation, and the 2,000 miles between us, I still found myself missing the tradition Emma and I used to share. I missed making snow angels with someone who mattered. What I didn't know yet was that the universe had its own plans for healing. and that sometimes the best way to honor a broken tradition is to create a completely new one with someone who actually deserves your heart. Portland welcomed me with 3 weeks of solid rain, which seemed appropriate for someone trying to wash away 22 years of mistaken identity. Pacific Northwest College of Arts sat in the Pearl District, surrounded by converted warehouses and coffee shops that stayed open until midnight. Everything smelled like roasted beans and wet pavement, a combination that somehow felt more honest than the crisp mountain air I'd grown up breathing. My dorm room was a shoebox on the 3rd floor of Meridian Hall, with a window that looked out onto a fire escape in the brick wall of the building next door. My roommate Derek was a sculpture major from California who owned exactly 3 t-shirts and talked constantly about the authentic grittiness of urban living. He meant well, but after growing up in a house where I could see mountains from every window, staring at brick walls felt more like punishment than authenticity. The photography program was intensive from day one. Professor Caldwell, a woman in her 50s with silver hair and paint-stained fingers. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Handed us cameras on the first morning and told us to capture something that revealed truth about our new environment. While other students immediately headed for the obvious shots, homeless camps, street art, Pike Place Market, I found myself drawn to the spaces between things. The narrow alleyways where rain collected in perfect puddles. The way morning light filtered through the persistent cloud cover. The faces of people waiting for buses, lost in thoughts I'd never know. I developed those first roles in the darkroom. At 2 in the morning, when the building was empty, except for security guards and insomniacs like me, there's something meditative about watching images slowly appear in Developer Solution, emerging from nothing like memories you'd forgotten. But every photograph I printed felt incomplete somehow, like I was documenting a life I was observing rather than living. That's when I met Zoe's cousin Marcus, who was visiting from Seattle during my 2nd month in Portland. Zoe had given him my number with strict instructions to make sure Jake isn't turning into a hermit. Marcus showed up at my dorm on a Saturday morning with coffee and a plan to explore every art gallery in the city, refusing to take no for an answer. Marcus was the opposite of Derek Quiet, where Derek was loud, thoughtful, where Derek was impulsive. He worked as a graphic designer for an environmental nonprofit and had the kind of easy confidence that came from knowing exactly who he was and being completely comfortable with it. We spent that Saturday walking through gallery after gallery, and Marcus asked questions about photography that made me think about my work in ways I never had before. "You're technically skilled," he said, studying a series of black and white portraits I'd brought along, "but there's something held back. In these shots, like you're afraid to get too close to your subjects." He was right, though I didn't want to admit it. Every photograph I'd taken since arriving in Portland maintained careful distance, physically and emotionally.
Oh.
I was documenting Portland like a tourist, rather than someone who actually lived there. You considered that maybe you're not ready to be vulnerable in your art because you're not ready to be vulnerable in your life, Marcus asked, as we sat in a coffee shop in Hawthorne, rain drumming against the windows. I wanted to dismiss his question, but something about the way he said it without judgment, just genuine curiosity, made me actually consider it. Since arriving in Portland, I'd kept everyone at arm's length. I attended classes, completed assignments, exchanged pleasantries with classmates, but I hadn't made a single real friend. I was living like someone in witness protection, keeping my past locked away and my future deliberately vague. That conversation with Marcus became a turning point. The next week, I signed up for Professor Caldwell's advanced workshop on documentary photography, which required students to spend an entire semester following one subject or theme. Most students chose obvious topics: gentrification, homelessness, the music scene. I decided to document the community of people who worked night shifts across Portland's security guards, hospital staff, diner cooks, cleaning crews, the invisible army that kept the city running while everyone else slept. The project forced me out of my comfort zone in ways I hadn't expected. To photograph someone authentically, you have to earn their trust first. That meant staying after class to talk with the security guard who worked in our building, It meant bringing coffee to the nurses at OHSU during their 3 a.m. break. It meant sitting in all-night diners, learning the stories of people who live their lives in the margins of everyone else's schedule. Slowly, Portland began to feel less like exile and more like possibility. The breakthrough came during my third month when I was photographing Maria Santos, a night shift janitor at a downtown office building. Maria was 62, had immigrated from El Salvador 30 years earlier, and supported her family by cleaning offices while they slept. She moved through those empty corporate spaces like a ghost, her work invisible to the people who would occupy those desks the next morning. I'd been documenting her routine for weeks when she invited me to stay after I finished shooting one night. We sat in the building's lobby at 4 in the morning, sharing coffee from her thermos and talking about family. Maria had 3 children, all college graduates, all successful professionals, who never had to clean anyone's office. Her English was careful, but expressive, and when she talked about her kids, her whole face transformed. "I am proud," she said, showing me photos on her phone. "They have choices I never had. But sometimes I think they forget that someone still has to do this work. Someone still has to take care of the places where important things happen." Something about the way she said it resonated with me in a way I wasn't expecting. We talked until dawn about the dignity of work that others overlooked, about the difference between being invisible and being undervalued. When I finally left that morning, I had more than just photographs. I had the beginning of understanding what I was really trying to capture. The night shift project became my first serious body of work. When I developed the photographs, I saw something different from my earlier attempts. These images had intimacy and respect, vulnerability and strength. They told stories about people who mattered, doing work that mattered, even if the world didn't always recognize it. Professor Caldwell entered the series in a regional student exhibition, and to my shock, it won second place. The local paper ran a feature about the project, and suddenly I was getting emails from other photographers who wanted to collaborate. Derek started introducing me as my roommate the artist, instead of just my roommate from Vermont. More importantly, I started feeling like someone who belonged in Portland, rather than someone who was just hiding there. But success brought unexpected complications. The attention from the exhibition meant people wanted to know my story, how I'd ended up in Portland, what had inspired me to focus on night shift workers, what my plans were after graduation. I'd gotten good at deflecting personal questions, giving vague answers about wanting to explore the Pacific Northwest and being drawn to urban photography. But maintaining that distance was exhausting, and it was limiting my ability to connect with people who might become real friends. Marcus noticed during one of his visits from Seattle. We were celebrating the exhibition win at a brewery in Southeast Portland when he called me out directly. "You know, I've been visiting you for months now. I still don't know anything real about your life before Portland," he said. "I know you're from Vermont and you study photography, but that's basically it. It's not a friendship, Jake. That's an acquaintanceship with good coffee." Gah. He was right, and I knew it. But the idea of telling anyone about Emma, about the humiliation of discovering I'd been living in a fantasy for years, felt impossible. How do you explain that you restructured your entire life around someone who thought you were pathetic? Do you admit that you'd been so naive about your own relationship that everyone else saw the truth except you? "It's not that simple," I said, staring into my beer instead of meeting his eyes. "It never is," Marcus replied. "But isolation isn't protection, man. It's just another kind of prison." That night, for the first time since leaving Vermont, I told someone the whole truth. I told Marcus about Emma, about our snow angel tradition, about overhearing her phone conversation and realizing that our entire relationship had been built on her pity rather than her affection. I told him about fleeing to Portland in the middle of the night, about spending months convinced that I was fundamentally unlovable, about being terrified that anyone who got close enough would see whatever it was that Emma had found so pathetic. Marcus listened without interrupting, and when I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "That's a heavy thing to carry alone," he finally said. "But Jake, you know that one person's inability to see your worth doesn't define your actual worth, right? Emma sounds like someone who was more concerned with appearances than authenticity. That's her limitation, not yours." It was the first time anyone had suggested that maybe Emma was the one with the problem, not me. The possibility felt radical and terrifying and hopeful all at once. Besides, Marcus added with a grin, anyone who would give up a friendship with someone as talented and genuine as you, for some prep school asshole clearly has terrible judgment, her loss is Portland's gain. Walking back to my dorm that night, I felt lighter than I had in months. The rain had stopped for once, and I could see stars between the clouds, a rare sight in Portland. For the first time since arriving, I started thinking about my future here, not as an escape from my past, but as a genuine new beginning. I had no idea that the universe was about to introduce me to someone who would make me understand the difference between settling for being loved and being cherished for exactly who you are. The coffee shop where I first saw Maya wasn't the kind of place you'd expect to find love. Grind Coffee on Belmont was cramped, perpetually crowded, and had exactly 3 mismatched tables that wobbled on the uneven floor. But they roasted there. Own Beans stayed open until midnight and didn't mind if you camped out for hours with a laptop and a single cup of coffee. For a broke art student, it was perfect. I've been going there for weeks, working on editing my night shift photography series when I noticed her. She sat at the corner table every Tuesday and Thursday evening, surrounded by legal briefs and environmental impact reports, her dark hair falling like a curtain around her face as she worked. She drank her coffee black, never added sugar, and had a habit of tapping her pen against her lips when she was thinking hard about something. What caught my attention wasn't just that she was beautiful, though. She absolutely was. In an understated way that seemed completely unconscious, but how completely absorbed she became in her work. While everyone else in the coffee shop was performing their productivity, checking phones and people watching, she seemed to exist in her own focused bubble. She reminded me of how I felt in the darkroom, lost in the process of creating something meaningful. For 3 weeks, we existed in parallel universes. I'd arrive around 7 with my laptop and editing equipment. She'd show up precisely at 7:30 with her stack of papers and legal pad. We'd work in comfortable silence for hours, occasionally catching each other's eyes when one of us needed to stretch or refill our coffee. She had the kind of smile that started small and then transformed her entire face, and I found myself timing my breaks just to catch glimpses of it. I might have spent the entire semester admiring her from a distance, if fate hadn't intervened in the form of Portland's notoriously unreliable weather. One Thursday in late October, I was deep into post-processing a particularly challenging series of photos when the power went out. The coffee shop plunged into darkness, emergency lighting casting eerie shadows across the room. "Well, that's problematic," came a voice from the corner table. I looked over to see Maya staring at her now useless laptop, a stack of papers spread across the table in front of her. "Working on something important?" I asked, grateful for an excuse to finally talk to her. She gestured at the documents with a rueful laugh. "Environmental impact assessment for a proposed development project. Due tomorrow morning, and apparently Mother Nature has opinions about my deadline." The barista announced that power was expected to be out for at least 2 hours, and most customers began packing up to leave. Maya looked genuinely distressed, shuffling through her papers by the dim emergency lighting. "I know this might sound weird," I said, surprising myself with my boldness, "but I live just a few blocks from here. I've got a generator and good lighting if you need somewhere to finish your work." She studied my face in the half-darkness, probably trying to determine if I was a serial killer or just a helpful stranger. Something in my expression must have convinced her I was harmless. "You know what? That would actually be a lifesaver," she said, already gathering her papers. And Maya, by the way. "I realize I should have introduced myself weeks ago instead of just stealing glances at your photo editing." "Jake," I replied, feeling heat rise in my cheeks, "and I noticed you noticing." The walk to my apartment was filled with easy conversation. That felt like reuniting with an old friend rather than meeting someone new. Maya told me she was an environmental lawyer who'd recently left a big firm to do consulting work for nonprofits. She'd moved to Portland 6 months earlier from San Francisco, drawn by the city's reputation for environmental consciousness and the chance to do work that actually mattered to her. "What about you?" she asked as we climbed the stairs to my 3rd-floor apartment. Are you a professional photographer or just very dedicated to your hobby? Art student, I admitted, unlocking my door. Though sometimes I'm not sure there's much difference between the two in terms of income potential. My apartment was nothing specialist. Studio with decent light and just enough space for a bed, a small kitchen, and my photography equipment. But Maya moved through the space like she belonged there, setting up her work at my kitchen table while I got the generator running and adjusted the lighting. "This is perfect," she said, spreading out her documents. "You're seriously saving my career right now." I made coffee while she worked, occasionally glancing over to watch her concentration. There was something mesmerizing about seeing someone completely in their element. Maya approached legal writing the way I approached photography, with meticulous attention to detail and genuine passion for the craft. "Can I ask what you're working on?" I said, bringing her a fresh cup. Her eyes lit up as she explained the project. A development company wanted to build luxury condos on a piece of wetland outside the city, and Maya was documenting why that would be an environmental disaster. She showed me aerial photographs of the site, pointed out rare bird habitats and water filtration systems that would be destroyed.
Ow!
Explained how the development would affect the entire ecosystem downstream. Most people think environmental law is just paperwork and regulations, she said, but really it's about protecting things that can't speak for themselves. These wetlands have been here for thousands of years, supporting countless species, cleaning our water, preventing floods, but they don't have a voice in city council meetings, you know. I found myself completely captivated, not just by her passion, but by the way she saw the world. Emma had always talked about success in terms of personal advancement and social status. Maya talked about success in terms of impact and legacy, about using her skills to protect something larger than herself. We worked side by side for the next 3 hours, occasionally sharing coffee refills and comfortable conversation. Maya asked thoughtful questions about my photography, and I found myself explaining my artistic process in ways I'd never articulated before. She had a way of listening that made you want to tell her everything, not because she was prying, but because she genuinely cared about understanding how people saw the world. "You have an interesting eye," she said, looking through some of the night shift photographs I had printed and pinned to my wall. "These aren't just portraits. They're statements about dignity and recognition. The composition choices you're making highlight your subject's humanity in a way that feels both intimate and respectful." It was the most insightful critique of my work anyone had ever offered, and it came from someone who wasn't even a photographer. Emma had always looked at my pictures and said they were nice or pretty, but Maya understood what I was trying to communicate through the images themselves. When the power came back on around midnight, neither of us seemed eager to end the evening. Maya had finished her report, but she lingered at my kitchen table, asking more questions about my background and my plans after graduation. "You mentioned you're from Vermont," she said. "Do you miss it?" Question caught me off guard. For months, I'd been so focused on escaping my past that I hadn't really considered what parts of my old life might actually be worth missing. "I miss the winters," I said, surprising myself with the honesty. "Real winters, with snow that transforms everything into something magical. Portland winters are just gray and wet. Functional, but not beautiful. Tell me about Vermont winters," Maya said, settling back in her chair like she had all the time in the world. So I told her about Milbrook, about how the first snowfall turned the mountains into something that belonged in a fairy tale. I told her about the way morning light looked different when it reflected off fresh snow, how the whole world became quieter and more peaceful. I found myself describing the joy of waking up to a landscape completely transformed overnight. The way snow made even familiar places feel new and full of possibility. I didn't tell her about Emma or the snow angels. That part of my past still felt too raw to share with someone I'd just met. But talking about the beauty of Vermont winters felt safe and honest, like I was sharing something true about myself, without risking too much vulnerability. "It sounds magical," Maya said when I finished. "I grew up in California, so I've only seen real snow a handful of times, but the way you describe it makes me want to experience it properly." Something in her voice when she said that curious and open and genuinely interested made my heart skip in a way I wasn't expecting. This was what it felt like to have someone actually listen to you. Someone who asked follow-up questions because they wanted to understand your perspective, not because they were waiting for their turn to talk. When Maya finally packed up her papers to leave, she hesitated at my door. "Jake, I know this might be forward, but would you like to get coffee sometime? Actual coffee, not emergency deadline coffee?" "I really enjoyed talking with you tonight. I'd like that," I said, probably, grinning like an idiot, though we should probably pick a place with more reliable electricity. She laughed, and the sound filled my apartment with warmth that lingered long after she left. I stood at my window, watching her walk down the street under the streetlights, feeling something I hadn't experienced in so long I'd almost forgotten what it was called: hope. Over the next few weeks, coffee dates became walks through Forest Park, which became dinners at hole-in-the-wall restaurants neither of us could really afford. Maya introduced me to hiking trails I'd never explored, to farmers markets where she knew vendors by name, to a side of Portland that felt authentic rather than performative. I showed her my favorite late-night photography spots, taught her how to see light and shadow the way a photographer does, shared the quiet places where I went to think and create. With Maya, conversation flowed effortlessly from serious topics to ridiculous observations to comfortable silences that never felt awkward. She told me about growing up in a family of lawyers, about her decision to leave corporate law despite the financial security, about her dreams of eventually working on international environmental policy. I found myself sharing more about my art, my goals, my fears about making a living as a photographer. But the more time we spent together, the more I realized I was still holding back the most important parts of my story. Maya knew I was from Vermont and that I'd come to Portland for art school. But she didn't know about Emma or why I'd really left home. Every time the conversation moved toward relationships or family, I found ways to redirect or deflect. It wasn't that I didn't trust Maya. If anything, spending time with her was showing me what trust actually felt like. But I was terrified that if she knew the truth, that I'd been so pathetic that my childhood friend had pitied me for years without my knowledge, she'd start seeing me the way Emma had, someone who needed to be managed rather than respected, cared for rather than loved as an equal. Maya was brilliant, successful, confident in ways I was still learning to be. Why would she want to be with someone who'd been so clueless about his own life that he'd restructured everything around a fantasy relationship? The irony wasn't lost on me that in trying to protect what Maya and I had, I was potentially sabotaging it with the same dishonesty that had characterized my relationship with Emma. But knowing something intellectually and being emotionally ready to act on it are two very different things. I just wasn't prepared for how quickly Maya would become essential to my happiness, or how much harder it would become to maintain my careful distance as I fell deeper in love with someone who deserved complete honesty. Maya and I had been together for 8 months when the call came that changed everything. I was in her cabin, sprawled across her couch editing photos while she worked on a brief at her kitchen table. Both of us existing in that comfortable domestic rhythm we developed. The late afternoon light streaming through her windows was perfect for detail work. And I was lost in adjusting contrast levels when my phone buzzed with a Vermont number I didn't recognize. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something made me answer Jake. The voice was hesitant, familiar in a way that made my stomach drop. "It's Zoe. I know you probably don't want to hear from anyone back home, but I felt like you should know. Emma's grandmother passed away yesterday. Eleanor Richardson had been like a second grandmother to me growing up. She was the one who taught Emma and me how to build proper snowmen, who made hot chocolate with real whipped cream after every winter adventure, who always had homemade cookies waiting when we showed up at the Richardson house with muddy boots and scraped knees. She'd been 93 and sharp as a tack the last time I'd seen her. The funeral is this Saturday," Zoe continued. "I wasn't sure if you'd want to come back for it, but Emma specifically asked me to call you. She said Eleanor would have wanted you there." My throat felt tight. "How is Emma handling it?"
Great.
"She and Tyler broke up about 6 months ago. Messy divorce proceedings and everything. She's been pretty isolated since then. I think losing Eleanor on top of everything else has hit her really hard." I glanced across the room at Maya, who had looked up from her work and was watching my face with concerned curiosity. The idea of returning to Milbrook, of facing Emma and all the memories I'd spent 2 years trying to escape felt overwhelming. "Jake," Zoe's voice was gentle, "you don't have to decide right now. But the service is at 2 on Saturday at St. Mary's. If you want to say goodbye to Eleanor." After I hung up, Maya came over and settled beside me on the couch, not pushing for information, but making it clear she was available if I wanted to talk. I realized this was the moment I'd been avoiding for months, the moment when keeping my past separate from my present became impossible. So I told her everything. About Emma, about our tradition, about overhearing that phone conversation, and realizing I'd been living in a fantasy. About fleeing to Portland in the middle of the night and spending 2 years convinced I was fundamentally unlovable. Maya listened without interrupting, her hand warm and steady in mine. "I understand why you didn't tell me before," she said. When I finished, "That kind of betrayal leaves marks that take time to heal. But Jake, you know that what Emma saw in you says nothing about who you actually are, right?" "Intellectually, yes," I said. "But emotionally, it's harder to believe." That Maya was quiet for a moment, processing everything I'd shared. "Do you want to go to the funeral?" "I don't know. Eleanor was important to me, but facing Emma after all this time feels terrifying. What if she still sees me the same way?" "If everyone does, then that's their limitation, not yours," Maya said firmly. "But I think you'll regret it if you don't say goodbye to someone who clearly meant a lot to you. Besides, you're not the same person who left Vermont 2 years ago. You've built a life you're proud of. You're doing work that matters. And you're in a relationship with someone who sees your actual worth." She was right, though the idea of returning to Milbrook still felt like voluntarily walking into a trap. "Would you come with me?" I asked, surprising myself with a question. Maya's eyes widened slightly. "Are you sure? Meeting your ex at a funeral isn't exactly the ideal introduction scenario." "I'm sure," I said, realizing as I said it that it was true. "I want you there. You're part of who I am now, and I don't want to face my past without my present." We flew into Burlington on Friday afternoon and drove the winding mountain roads to Milbrook as the sun was setting. Maya had never seen Vermont in winter, and watching her reaction to the landscape I'd grown up in felt like seeing it through new eyes. Snow covered everything in pristine white, transforming the familiar mountains and valleys into something that looked like a Christmas card. "Jake, this is incredible," she said, as we drove through the center of town. "I understand now why you miss real winters. This is like entering a different world." Checked into the White Mountain in the only hotel in town and had dinner at Murphy's Tavern, where I'd worked summers during high school. Half the staff still remembered me, and their genuine warmth helped ease some of my anxiety about being back. Maya charmed everyone she met, asking thoughtful questions about local history and environmental challenges. LA treating my hometown with the same respect she brought to everything else. But that night, lying in the unfamiliar hotel bed, I barely slept. Tomorrow I'd see Emma for the first time in 2 years, at the funeral of someone who'd loved us both. I had no idea what to expect or how I'd handle it. The morning of the funeral dawned bright and cold, with fresh snow falling steadily. St. Mary's was packed, testimony to how beloved Eleanor Richardson had been in the community. Maya and I found seats near the back, and I spent the first few minutes scanning the crowd for familiar faces. Emma sat in the front row with her parents, wearing a black dress that somehow made her look both elegant and devastated. Her hair was shorter than I remembered, styled in a way that looked more professional, more grown up. When she stood to give the eulogy, I felt Maya squeeze my hand gently. Emma's voice shook as she talked about her grandmother's kindness, her wisdom, her ability to make everyone feel welcomed and valued. She shared stories about Eleanor's garden, her famous chocolate chip cookies, her tradition of taking Emma and her friends ice skating every winter. When she mentioned how Eleanor had treated me like another grandchild, including me in every family celebration and holiday tradition, I felt tears start to sting my eyes. Grandma Eleanor believed that love wasn't about blood relations or social expectations, Emma said, her voice growing stronger. She believed that love was about showing up for people, about seeing their worth even when they couldn't see it themselves. She taught me that the most important relationships in life are the ones built on genuine care and respect, not convenience or appearances. Something in the way she said those last words made me think she was speaking directly to me, though. She hadn't looked in my direction once during the service. After the burial, there was a reception at the Richardson house. Maya and I hung back initially, but Mrs. Richardson spotted us across the room and made her way over immediately. "Jake," she said, pulling me into a tight hug. "I'm so glad you came. Eleanor would have been thrilled to see you here. And you must be Maya." Maya handled the introduction with perfect grace, expressing genuine condolences and sharing how much I'd told her about Eleanor's influence on my life. Mrs. Richardson seemed genuinely taken with her, asking about her work and her impressions of Vermont. "Emma's been asking about you," Mrs. Richardson said quietly, while Maya was distracted by a conversation with one of Eleanor's neighbors. "She'd like to talk if you're willing." Before I could respond, Emma appeared at my elbow. Up close, she looked tired and older than her 24 years, but there was something different in her expression, less of the casual confidence I remembered, more uncertainty and what looked like genuine regret. "Jake," she said softly, "thank you for coming. Grandma would have been so happy to see you here." "I'm sorry for your loss," I said, falling back on formal politeness because I didn't trust myself to say anything more personal. Emma glanced at Maya, who was still deep in conversation a few feet away. "Could we talk privately for a few minutes?" "I understand if you'd rather not, but there are things I need to say." I looked over at Maya, who caught my eye and nodded slightly, letting me know she'd be fine on her own. Emma led me to the sun porch where we'd spent countless afternoons as kids, a room lined with windows that looked out over the snow-covered garden. "I owe you an apology," Emma said, without preamble. "Actually, I owe you several apologies, but I'm not sure where to begin." "Emma, you don't have to." "Yes, I do," she interrupted. "I led you on for years when I knew we weren't on the same page about our relationship. I talked about you behind your back in ways that were cruel and dismissive. I made you feel like there was something wrong with you when the problem was my own cowardice and selfishness." She took a shaky breath before continuing. "The truth is, I was scared. Scared of disappointing my parents, scared of not living up to everyone's expectations, scared of choosing something real over something that looked good on paper. You represented everything genuine and authentic in my life, and instead of appreciating that, I convinced myself it made you weak." I stared out at the garden, where Eleanor's bird feeders still hung from the oak tree, trying to process what Emma was saying. "Tyler was a disaster," she continued. "He was exactly what my parents wanted: connected, polished, ambitious, and absolutely nothing like what I actually needed. He cheated on me with one of his law school classmates, then tried to take half of everything I'd inherited from my grandfather in the divorce. Everything you would have given freely, he demanded as payment for his presence in my life." "Sorry that happened to you," I said, and meant it. "But Emma, I can't be the person you come back to when other things don't work out. I spent too many years thinking I wasn't good enough for you, and I won't put myself in that position again." "I'm not asking you to," she said quickly. "I can see how happy you are with Maya. She's wonderful, by the way. The way she talks about your work, the way she looks at you, that's what real love looks like. I'm glad you found someone who sees your worth from the beginning instead of taking years to recognize it." We stood in silence for a moment, watching snow fall past the windows. "I just wanted you to know that I'm sorry," Emma said finally, "and that you were never the problem, Jake. You were never pathetic or weak or any of the things I said. You were loyal and kind and genuine, and I was too immature to appreciate those qualities. I hope you can forgive me, even if we can't be friends again." "I forgive you," I said, realizing as I said it that I meant it. "But you're right that we can't go back to being friends. Too much has happened, and we're both different people now." Emma nodded, tears starting to spill down her cheeks. "Will you do me one favor, though? Will you take Maya to see our Snow Angel Hill before you leave town? I know that tradition meant something to you, and I think you should have the chance to make new memories there with someone who deserves them." The suggestion hit me like a physical blow. I'd avoided even driving past Riverside Park since arriving in town, too afraid of how it would feel to see that hill again. "Emma, I don't think, please," she said. "Don't let my mistakes ruin Something that was beautiful. That hill doesn't belong to me, Jake. It belongs to everyone who's ever found joy there. Make it yours again, with someone who'll treasure the tradition the way it deserves to be treasured. When Maya and I left the reception an hour later, I was quiet during the drive back to the hotel. Maya didn't push for details about my conversation with Emma, but she could tell something significant had shifted. "How are you feeling?" asked as we sat by the window in our hotel room, watching fresh snow continue to fall. Confused, I admitted. Relieved, maybe? Emma apologized for everything, and it felt genuine, but also sad, because I realized that the person I thought I was in love with for all those years never really existed. I was in love with potential, with what I hoped we could become, not with who she actually was. Maya took my hand, intertwining our fingers. That must be both heartbreaking and freeing. It is, I said. But Maya, there's something I want to show you tomorrow before we fly home. If you're up for it, of course. What is it? I told her about the snow angel tradition, about the hill where Emma and I had created countless memories, about how that simple ritual had represented everything I'd thought we shared. Maya listened with the same thoughtful attention she brought to everything, and when I finished, she was quiet for a long moment.
Shake,
she said finally. Are you sure? You? Want to go back there? It sounds like that place holds a lot of painful associations. That's exactly why I need to go back, I said. Emma suggested I take you there, and at first I thought it was crazy. But the more I think about it, the more I realize she's right. I've let my fear of that place, and what it represented, keep me from enjoying something that was genuinely beautiful. Maybe it's time to reclaim it. Maya smiled, the expression soft and understanding. Then let's go make some new memories. The next morning, we drove to Riverside Park under a sky so blue it looked artificial. Fresh snow had fallen. Overnight, covering the familiar landscape in pristine white. Maya marveled at everything, the way sunlight sparkled off the snow, the silence that seemed to muffle even our footsteps, the crisp air that turned our breath to vapor. When we reached the hill, I stopped walking. It looked exactly the same as it had in my childhood, a gentle slope that rolled down toward the frozen river, surrounded by pine trees heavy with snow. For a moment, I was 7 years old again, racing Emma to see who could make the biggest angel. This is it, I said, my voice barely above a whisper.
Maya looked around, taking in the peaceful beauty of the spot.
Jake, this is magical.
I can.
See why this place was special to you? You want to try making snow angels? I asked, surprised by how nervous I felt asking the question. I've never made one before, Maya admitted. You'll have to show me how. So I did. I showed her how to lie down in the untouched snow, how to spread her arms and legs wide, how to move them slowly to create the wing and dress shapes. We lay, side by side in the cold snow, looking up at the brilliant blue sky, and for the first time in 2 years I felt completely at peace with my past. When we stood up to admire our work, Maya clapped her hands together in delight. They're perfect. We should take a picture. I pulled out my phone and captured the image, two perfect angels side by side in the pristine snow, with the frozen river and mountains visible in the background. But more importantly, I captured the feeling of creating something beautiful with someone who chose to be there, someone who saw wonder in traditions that mattered to me. You know what? Maya said, brushing snow off her jacket. We should start our own tradition here. Not to replace what you had before, but to create something new that belongs to us. What kind of tradition? I asked, though I already knew. I'd agree to whatever she suggested. Every winter, when we can manage it, we come back here and make snow angels together. But we also bring a small offering for the place, maybe birdseed for the winter birds, or flowers for the spring. Something to say thank you for the beauty and the peace. It was perfect. A way to honor what this place had meant to me while creating something entirely new with Maya. A tradition built on choice rather than assumption. On mutual joy rather than one-sided devotion. As we walked back to the car, I realized that Emma had given me an unexpected gift. It's not just her apology, which I'd needed to hear, but permission to reclaim something beautiful that I'd thought was lost forever. The hill would always hold memories of my childhood with Emma, but now it would also hold the memory of this moment with Maya, the moment when I finally understood the difference between love that diminishes you and love that helps you grow. That afternoon, as our plane lifted off from Burlington, and I watched the Vermont mountains disappear below the clouds, I felt something I hadn't experienced since leaving home 2 years earlier. I felt ready to build a future that honored my past without being trapped by it, with someone who saw my history as part of my story rather than evidence of my inadequacy. Maya held my hand during takeoff, and when I looked over at her, she was smiling out the window at the landscape below. "Thank you," I said quietly. "For what?" "For coming with me, for not judging my messy history, for helping me turn something painful into something beautiful again." She squeezed my hand. "That's what people do when they love each other, Jake. They help each other heal." Flying back to Portland, I knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, I'd never again mistake pity for love or convenience for commitment. Maya had shown me what it felt like to be chosen rather than settled for, valued rather than tolerated. And for the first time in my life, that felt like more than enough. 3 years later, I stood in the same spot where Maya and I had made our first snow angels together. But this time I wasn't alone with my memories. Maya was beside me, laughing as she helped our 5-year-old niece Sophie learn the proper technique for angel making. Sophie was Marcus's daughter, visiting us for the holidays, and her pure delight at the simple magic of snow had reminded me why this tradition mattered so much. "Uncle Jake, look at mine," Sophie called out, struggling to stand without disturbing her creation. "It's got really big wings because I'm going to be a pilot when I grow up." Maya carefully helped Sophie to her feet, and we all admired the lopsided but enthusiastic angel impression she'd left in the snow. This was our 4th annual pilgrimage to Riverside Park, and each year the tradition had evolved into something richer and more meaningful. We'd married the previous spring in Maya's hometown in California, surrounded by redwood trees and the kind of understated elegance that reflected who we'd become together. Emma had sent a wedding gift, a beautiful coffee table book of Vermont landscapes with a note that simply said, "For new traditions in beautiful places." I'd appreciated the gesture, though by then Emma felt like a character from someone else's story rather than a painful part of my own. Our life in Portland had flourished beyond anything I'd imagined when I first fled there as a broken college kid. My photography career had taken off after a gallery show featuring my documentation of environmental restoration projects throughout the Pacific Northwest. Maya had started her own consulting firm, specializing in cases that protected endangered ecosystems. We'd bought a small house in Southeast Portland with enough space for both our work and the art studio Maya had insisted I needed, but Vermont winters still called to us. Every December, we'd plan our annual trip back to Milbrook, staying at the same inn where we'd first returned together, visiting Eleanor's grave to leave fresh flowers, and always ending with our snow angel ceremony at Riverside Park. This year felt different, though. As Sophie ran ahead to build a snowman, Maya and I walked slowly through the park where I'd played as a child. The familiar paths were exactly as I remembered them, but I moved through them now as someone who belonged to himself, rather than someone desperately seeking belonging from others. "I have something to tell you," Maya said, as we reached the bench overlooking the frozen river. Her voice carried a note of excitement that made me turn to study her face. "What is it?" I asked, though something in her expression was already making my heart race with hope. "We're going to need to modify our tradition next year," she said, pulling off her glove to show me her hand resting on her still flat stomach. "We're going to have a little angel maker joining us." The world seemed to pause around us. Snow continued falling. Sophie's laughter echoed from across the park. But for a moment, everything else faded except Maya's radiant smile and the news that was rewriting our future in the most beautiful way possible. "Really?" I whispered, reaching out to cover her hand with mine. "It's really about 8 weeks along. I wanted to wait until we were here in this place that means so much to both of us, to tell you." I kissed her then, soft and reverent, tasting snowflakes on her lips, and feeling like my heart might actually burst from happiness. This was what love was supposed to feel like, not desperate or uncertain, not built on hope that someday you'd be enough, but solid and joyful and completely mutual. "I love you," I said against her forehead. "I love you, and I love our baby, and I love the life we're building together. Even if our kid turns out to be more interested in mud puddles than snow angels," Maya teased. "Especially then. We'll start a mud angel tradition in spring." That evening back at the inn, we called both our families to share the news. Maya's parents were thrilled, immediately starting to plan visits and offering to help however they could. My grandmother, now 91 and living in an assisted care facility, cried happy tears over FaceTime and insisted we name the baby after her if it was a girl. As we sat by the fireplace in our room, Maya working on her laptop while I edited photos from our day at the park, I found myself thinking about the journey that had brought us to this moment. 4 years ago, I'd been convinced that Emma's rejection meant I was fundamentally unlovable. I'd defined myself by someone else's inability to see my worth, and nearly missed out on real love because I was so focused on proving myself to someone who'd never valued authenticity. "What are you thinking about?" Maya asked, looking up from her work. "Just how different everything is now," I said. "How different I am." "You're not that different," Maya replied thoughtfully. "You're still the same person who cares deeply, who sees beauty in small moments, who creates art that moves people. You were always worthy of love, Jake. You just needed to find someone who recognized that from the beginning." She was right, though it had taken years for me to truly believe it. Emma's inability to love me hadn't been evidence of my inadequacy, it had been evidence of her own limitations and fears. Maya's ability to love me wasn't a miracle or something I'd earned through self-improvement. It was simply the natural result of two compatible people choosing each other freely. Our baby was born the following August, a healthy girl we named Eleanor, after my surrogate grandmother who'd shown me what unconditional love looked like. Little Ellie had Maya's dark hair and my stubborn cowlick, and from her first days she seemed to view the world with curious wonder rather than fear. That December, we brought 3-month-old Ellie to Vermont for her first snow angel experience. She was too young to participate, of course, but we bundled her up in a tiny snowsuit, took photos of our family of 3 at the park that had become so important to our story. As Maya and I lay down to make our angels, Ellie sleeping peacefully in her carrier beside us, I thought about all the traditions this little girl would inherit and create. She'd grow up knowing that love was supposed to feel safe and joyful, that relationships were built on mutual respect and genuine affection. She'd never have to question whether she was worthy of being chosen because she'd be surrounded by people who celebrated her existence from the very beginning. "Do you think?" Maya asked, as we stood to admire our work, 2 adult angels flanking a small pile of snow we'd shaped to look like a baby angel. "Think she'd want to continue the tradition when she's older? If she doesn't, we'll find new traditions that matter to her," I said, adjusting Ellie's tiny knit hat. "The important thing isn't the specific ritual. It's having people who show up for you consistently, who see your worth without conditions." Maya smiled, understanding exactly what I meant. We'd both learned the hard way that love wasn't about convincing someone to choose you, it was about building a life with someone who'd already chosen you gladly. As we walked back to the car, Ellie fussing softly in her carrier, I looked back, once at our snow angels on the hill. Tomorrow the wind might blur their edges, and next week new snow might cover them completely. But the tradition would continue, evolving and growing as our family grew, creating new memories while honoring the simple joy of being together in beautiful places. Emma had given me this place as a way of making amends, but Maya had made it ours through the gift of her presence and partnership. And now, little Ellie would grow up knowing that some traditions are worth keeping, not because of their history, but because of the love that sustains them year after year. That night, as Maya nursed Ellie by the window of our hotel room, both of them silhouetted against the snowy landscape outside, I felt the deep satisfaction of a life lived authentically, no more trying to be enough for someone who couldn't appreciate my worth. No more mistaking drama for passion or uncertainty for love. Just the quiet happiness of being chosen by people who saw me clearly and loved what they saw, and the anticipation of watching our daughter discover her own capacity for Joy in simple, sacred moments. The snow would melt come spring, but the love we'd built together would endure through every season, growing stronger and more beautiful with each passing year. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.